A single piano note fills the room. Decades of silence hang heavy, broken by the trembling echo of a voice once unstoppable. Steve Perry, icon, legend, the soul of a generation, sits alone, eyes glistening, as a song from his past drags him back into a storm of memory, triumph, and heartbreak. Not the stadiums, not the screaming fans, not the fame, just the weight of a melody he once loved and feared. What memories lie hidden in those notes? What truths has he been avoiding all these years? Tonight, that song asks him a question he can no longer ignore. Stay with us, because the story behind this note, this voice, and these tears is one the world thought it had already heard, but it hasn't. The voice that changed rock. Long before the tears, long before the silence, there was a voice that could stop time. Steve Perry wasn't just a singer, he was something more. A revelation in an era of raw, untamed rock. Journey was a band searching for its identity, talented but incomplete. And then Perry arrived, not merely as a new member, but as a force that would transform everything. From the first note he sang, it was clear this was no ordinary performer. He didn't just hit pitches or remember lyrics, he communicated. Every word carried a story. Every note was layered with feeling. Even before the first applause, the audience could feel that it was something real, something rare. Fans didn't just hear him, they experienced him. In arenas packed with thousands of screaming fans, Perry had a way of making the air feel almost alive, electric with emotion. Songs like Wheel in the Sky and Lights weren't just hits to top the charts. They were confessions, windows into human desire, longing, and heartbreak. Each performance felt intimate, even to a sea of strangers. Listeners didn't leave the stadium with only the memory of music. They left carrying pieces of Perry's soul, mirrored in their own experiences of love, loss, and hope. Yet, behind the eye-roaring applause and standing ovations, there was a man quietly carrying the weight of every note. Each song demanded honesty, not just technical perfection. Singing wasn't just about entertaining an audience. It was about offering a piece of himself, raw and unguarded. That voice, smooth yet jagged at the edges, melodic yet aching, became the defining sound of a generation. It wasn't just powerful, it was personal. Perry became the symbol of emotion in rock, the one who reminded people that music could make them feel things they couldn't put into words. And yet, fame came with its own shadows. Even at the peak of his career, Perry wrestled with moments of quiet doubt. The cheers, the flashes, the endless recognition, each reminder of success also reflected what he had surrendered: peace, privacy, and even fragments of his own identity. The more he chased perfection, the further he felt from the person he once was. That tension, the push and pull between artistry and self, was invisible to the crowd, but constant for Perry. Every note, every high, every hit he performed carried a hidden weight, a story only he fully understood. This delicate balance between brilliance and burden, between giving and losing himself, laid the groundwork for a moment decades later that would change everything. A single song, long avoided, would confront him with all that he had carried: the triumphs, the losses, the love, and the pain. The voice that once commanded arenas would tremble in a quiet room, facing memories too deep to ignore. This was the beginning of a journey back to himself, a journey that would prove that even the strongest voice can be fragile, and that behind every legend is a man with fears, regrets, and the power to feel too deeply. The price of perfection. Fame came fast, faster than anyone could have predicted, And with it came a pressure that wasn't always visible from the outside. For Steve Perry, singing was never just about hitting notes or performing for applause. It was about delivering every song with a level of perfection that bordered on obsession. Engineers in the studio noticed it. His bandmates noticed it. Producers noticed it. And anyone who worked with him knew that if a take wasn't flawless, he would start again. And again. Hours could pass without pause, the studio falling silent except for the notes he demanded to hear, until everyone present was caught between awe at his dedication and exhaustion at the relentless pursuit of something that, for Perry, could never truly be complete. But that perfection, as beautiful as it sounded to the audience, came with a steep cost. Behind the microphone, Perry wrestled with stress, exhaustion, and an ever-growing fear that he could fail. Tours were long and grueling, with nights blending into each other in a blur of lights and applause, yet never enough. Interviews felt like tests he had to pass. Expectations from fans, bandmates, and himself piled up like invisible walls, heavy and suffocating. For years, he poured everything into music, yet each success seemed to take a piece of him in return. His privacy, his sense of calm, the freedom to simply exist without the weight of expectation pressing on every note he sang. By the late 1980s, the pressure began to change him in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. He started withdrawing, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. Music, the same thing that had given him purpose and a voice the world admired, had also become a reminder of what he had sacrificed. Time, relationships, peace, and even a sense of himself. Listening to his own songs became an ordeal, each note echoing memories of exhaustion, missed moments, and unhealed wounds. And so, for decades, he stepped back from the spotlight. His disappearance from public life wasn't dramatic or scandalous. There were no fiery interviews or public fights. It was quieter, more painful in its invisibility. The world continued to see the legend, the man who had defined an era of rock with a voice that could shatter hearts. But Perry saw the cost behind the scenes, the personal toll that came with chasing perfection. And it was that very cost that would haunt him years later. The weight of it, making him hesitant, cautious, and deeply reflective when the song he once loved, the song that had once been a companion to his emotions, came calling again. Perfection had demanded everything from him, yet it had left a void that only honesty and courage could fill. This tension, the conflict between brilliance and burden, would shape the man he became, and set the stage for a moment decades later when he would confront not just a song, but the emotions and memories he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The song that haunted him. The song was Faithfully. On stage, it had always been more than a song. It was a love letter, a tribute to loyalty and devotion, a melody that fans around the world could sing along to and feel deeply connected with. But for Steve Perry, it carried a weight far heavier than applause or admiration. This song wasn't just music. It was a reflection of his heart, a reminder of love lost, promises he had made and failed to keep, and the complicated emotions that fame had forced him to navigate. Every note, every line, echoed with memories of Sherry, the woman who had been his muse, his calm in the chaos, the one who understood him before the world did. And with her came the heartbreak, the distance, and the emptiness that followed. For decades, he avoided singing faithfully, not because he couldn't perform it, not because he feared judgment, but because he feared feeling. Every time he thought of the melody, it brought back moments he had tried to bury. The long tours that kept him away from home, the silence of hotel rooms at night, the conversations he never had, the distance between him and those he loved most. It was a mirror, one that reflected every part of himself he had hidden, every regret and every loss. Listening to it, even privately, was like opening a door to a room he wasn't sure he could handle. The world adored Faithfully. Fans sang it at concerts, couples dedicated it to each other, and radio stations played it endlessly. To them, it was uplifting, timeless, a story of devotion and romantic love. But for Perry, it was almost a ghost. The song reminded him of choices he had made, of paths he hadn't taken, of a life and love he had stepped away from. Its notes were not just music. They were a confrontation with his own emotions, a test of whether he could face himself and what he had sacrificed along the way. And yet, paradoxically, that very song would one day become his guide back to himself. It was the song that would pull him into the light after years of silence, showing that vulnerability and honesty could exist alongside memory and pain. It would remind him that feeling deeply, even when it hurts, could also heal. The same melody that once haunted him, that once made him retreat from the world, would eventually become the key to reconnecting with his music, his emotions, and ultimately, the part of himself he thought he had lost forever. Faithfully wasn't just a song, it was a doorway to redemption, a mirror of the past, and a bridge to the future. For Perry, it represented all he had lost, all he had endured, and the courage it would take to finally confront both. And when the moment came, decades later, it would show him that some songs don't just tell a story. They make you live it, feel it, and, if you're brave enough, finally understand it. Return to the studio. At 69, the moment Perry had avoided for decades finally arrived. The world had moved on, fans had grown older, and yet here he was, alone in a quiet studio, facing a song that had haunted him for more than 20 years. He pressed play, and the familiar chords of Faithfully filled the room. Instantly, he froze. The sound wasn't just music, it was a mirror, reflecting every choice, every regret, every piece of life he had tried to forget. Tears began to stream down his face, unbidden, unstoppable. This wasn't nostalgia or a longing for the spotlight. It wasn't about performing for anyone. It was the recognition of everything he had avoided, everything he had buried deep inside himself. The man who had once commanded massive arenas, who had held the attention of millions with a single note, was now vulnerable. Shaking, raw, and unprotected, Perry was confronted not with an audience, but with his own emotions. Every line, every chord, every pause pulled him deeper into memories he had carried silently. Sherry, the love he lost. Kelly, the woman who had reminded him of life's fragile beauty. The endless tours that had both elevated and exhausted him. The triumphs he had celebrated, and the personal losses he had mourned in silence. The weight of it all pressed down, heavier than any stage lights or applause ever could. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to feel it fully, without the armor of performance, without the shield of perfection. It was a reckoning. This wasn't simply a comeback to music or a nod to fans. It was a confrontation with a life he had walked away from, a life he had left unfinished in the notes of a song. One single melody, decades old, held the power to break him entirely, to unearth emotions that had been frozen under years of avoidance. And yet, in that vulnerability, there was also healing. The same voice that had inspired millions now trembled in quiet reflection, not for applause, not for charts, but for the truth it had carried all along. Every note became a conversation with himself, a dialogue with the past, a moment of honesty he had denied for years. He remembered the nights of exhaustion, the times of doubt, the triumphs that felt hollow without personal connection. And he also remembered the love, the moments of joy, the music that had once given him purpose. That small studio, once just a place to record songs, became a sanctuary. For hours, he sat there, letting the music wash over him, acknowledging the emotions he had suppressed. And in that acknowledgement, he found a quiet kind of peace, a reminder that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that feeling deeply wasn't a failure, and that music could still carry him, even after years of silence. The return to the studio was more than a performance. It was a meeting with himself, a reconciliation with a past that had shaped him, and a step toward a future where he could be both Steve Perry, the legend, and Steve Perry, the man, in harmony with every note he had ever sung. Healing through music. From that night on, everything changed for Steve Perry. Music was no longer a burden, a source of pressure, or a mirror of lost opportunities. It became a bridge back to himself. He didn't return for fame, the applause, or chart-topping hits. He returned for the simple, profound reason of feeling alive again. The notes, the chords, the melodies weren't tools for perfection anymore. They were tools for connection, for reflection, for healing. And in that quiet, intimate space, he discovered something he had almost forgotten: the joy of being honest with himself through his art. His comeback album, Traces, was more than a collection of songs. It wasn't about trying to reclaim the glory of the past or proving that he could still hit the high notes. Each track was carefully, tenderly crafted to reflect who Steve Perry had become: a man who had lived, loved, lost, and survived. Every song was a confession, a memory, a gift not just for the audience, but for himself. It carried the weight of decades of silence, of fears faced, and emotions embraced. With every recording, every rehearsal, he pieced together the fragments of the life he had set aside, allowing music to be the language through which he healed. His voice, once famous for soaring with electrifying power, had changed. It was softer now, textured by years of experience and reflection, weathered by life but enriched with authenticity. There was no longer the relentless pursuit of perfection, no obsession with flawless delivery. Instead, he sought connection with the music, connection with the stories behind each song, and connection with those who would listen. Interviews, small private performances, and intimate recordings became opportunities to communicate not just melodies, but truth. He shared the story of a man who had finally made peace with himself, who had learned that it was okay to be vulnerable, human, and real. The tears that faithfully once drew, the tears of heartbreak, fear, and regret, now carried a different meaning. They became tears of acceptance, of courage, of gratitude for being able to feel again. For fans, it was a gift to witness a legend singing not for fame, but for life itself. For Perry, it was redemption, a reclaiming of the music, the memories, and the man he had almost lost. In the quiet of his studio, the echoes of his voice became a testimony. Music doesn't just entertain, it heals, it transforms, and it reminds us of who we are meant to be. Steve Perry's journey reminds us that the strongest voices aren't always the loudest. They're the ones that carry truth, vulnerability, and heart. He showed the world that stepping away doesn't mean defeat, and returning doesn't mean reliving the past. It means choosing honesty, choosing healing, and finding peace in your own story. The song that once broke him now became a bridge between who he was and who he had become. It wasn't about fame, it wasn't about perfection, it was about connection, memory, and finally, forgiveness. For decades, the world thought he disappeared. The truth is, he was listening, feeling, and waiting for the right moment to return on his terms. If you've felt the weight of your past, or the power of music to heal, you know exactly what this story is about. Steve Perry reminds us that some songs are more than notes. They're mirrors, lessons, and guides. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and comment with your favorite Steve Perry song or moment. Share it with friends who love music, because some stories are too powerful to keep to ourselves.